Our next storyteller, when she was 12 years old, she told her mother she wanted to marry 3 different men for cross-cultural purposes. Her mother said, "That sounds good." Let's welcome Tina Martin in how the Peace Corps' version of the South Pacific saved me from marrying 3 men.
We don't have electricity in Tonga. Okay, so when I first heard about the theme for tonight, Don't Tell Mom, I thought immediately of a musical, as I usually do. This one was from Cabaret, you know, when she sings, "Please, sir, if you run into my mama, don't reveal my indiscretion. Give a working girl a chance. Please, sir, don't tell mama," etc. Because I've always felt, most things do remind me of musicals, because I grew up with a piano and with people gathering around and singing along, and I've always felt that breaking into song should just be part of social discourse. So that was one thing that I thought about when I heard this topic. But the other one was what I did tell Mom, because I did tell her things like my dream of marrying 3 men, and what I told her was, I want to be a very faithful wife, but not just to one man. I want to be faithful to 3 men, and I want them to live in other countries. My mom said, "Sounds good to me." And I said, one is going to be French, another Mexican, and another a Chinaman, because in those days we said Chinaman and it wasn't a racial slur. So then I said, then I will have a baby with each man, and my children and I will spend 4 months in France, 4 months in Mexico, and 4 months in China, learning the culture and learning the language. Mother said, "Sounds good to me." And I'm sure it did, because my mother had formed the World Friendship Club when she was in high school at Hamilton in Los Angeles, and she and I both regarded people from other cultures, people who spoke other languages, as gods. We worshipped them. You know, the way that most Americans worship athletes or popular singers or movie stars or sometimes Jesus. Actually, we worship Jesus because he was from another culture and he's from another language. But we wanted, so my mother understood that we needed to do something beyond what we were doing in Columbia, South Carolina, where we were living at the time. This was 1957. So I held tight to this idea that I would marry these 3 men. I knew that it probably wasn't extremely realistic, but I held tight to it till I was about 15. And in 1961, President Kennedy introduced the Peace Corps, which would take people to another country and train them to live in another culture, to integrate, something that was a dirty word in Columbia, South Carolina, a communist conspiracy, they said. So I would be able to go to another country at the government's expense. I wouldn't have to use my life savings, because in those days we didn't have credit cards. Can you believe it? So I would go at their expense, and I thought 2 years actually living in the culture, that's 8 times better than those 4 months each for my 3 husbands. So I decided that I would go. So I told Mom, when I graduate from college, I'm going to join the Peace Corps. And she said, "Sounds good to me." And when the time came, I applied for any French or Spanish-speaking country. By that time, I had learned some French and I had learned some Spanish. I could sing most of Umbrellas of Cherbourg. Un parapluie noir, je viens montrer le parapluie au monsieur. Or Spanish, bésame, bésame mucho. And I knew that I could just build on these phrases in Peace Corps. So I don't know what happened to Chinese, but I know that we didn't study it in school, and I didn't know any Chinese songs. And also my father had given a lecture at the United Nations, unsolicited, saying that it was an outrage that mainland China had not been recognized and that Taiwan was representing these millions of people on mainland China. So maybe that had something to do with it. But anyway, I said any Spanish or French-speaking country. And then they gave me a response, and I opened a letter, and they invited me to train for Tonga. So I asked myself, well, where in Africa is that? And my mom said, look it up. So I did, and I found out that it wasn't in Africa at all. It was a little speck in the Pacific Ocean. And I knew what had happened to Napoleon. He would have been exiled to Elba, right? So I thought this was the Peace Corps' way of rejecting me, of saying that you're not wanted. And I knew that Alan Sherman song. Good advice costs nothing and it's worth the price. And I knew the price was nothing, which was my price. Was I not even worth nothing? That sounds like bad grammar. So I thought, but then I realized, okay, so Tonga is in the ocean, but it's in the South Pacific. And I knew that musical by heart. From my parents' 78 RPM records, from my own 33 1/3 LP that I bought with Mitzi Gaynor in the movie version, and from my parents singing with their friends around the piano, all those show tunes. Valley high, some enchanted evening, 3 men of my dreams, 3 men to be living with, 3 men to have 3 kids with. This nearly was mine. So I thought, yes, okay, I will go, and I will be Nellie Forbush, but I won't be carefully taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly made, or people whose skin is a different shade. I'd never been carefully taught. So I would go and I would integrate. I would be part of the Tongan culture. And I told my mom, and she said, sounds good to me. So I did go to Tonga, and it was as good as it sounded to my mom. I dated a Tongan, an Englishman, and an American. But the American, that's okay because he was a foreigner in Tonga. And if I had wanted to wash those men right out of my hair, I would have had to do it from water that I drew from the well and heated on my kerosene stove. And I trained teachers and I taught children English as a singing language. And this is the version of Dites-moi in Tongan. Malo e lele, o fefe hake, malo e lele, aluki fe, malo e lele, mo fefe hake, aluai, no foai, go or stay. I stayed. And now 45 years later, I can say, we are ocean. And I can say, everything I should have learned, I could have learned in Tonga. And I did tell Mom. The husbands came later.